Hi, my name is Peaches and welcome to my channel. If you end up liking my video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Today we are going to be talking about Asperger's as a diagnosis, Aspie supremacy, and Dr. Hans Asperger. Because of this, we're going to be touching on some very sensitive topics like racism, anti-Semitism, eugenics, ableism, and euthanization, as well as mention of the Nazi regime. If this video is too much for you, you can always just click away and watch a different video. So, what is Aspie supremacy and what is Asperger's as a diagnosis? Before we address those two things, we need to look at the origin of the term and diagnosis, which is Hans Asperger. Dr. Hans Asperger was in Vienna during the Nazi regime, and while not an official Nazi, he was very much one in spirit and supported and found work through accommodating himself to the Nazi regime. Even his mentor, Franz Hamburger, was a Nazi, and he worked alongside Erkan Jetkilius, I totally butchered that name, whom created the T4 program that killed around 300,000 people. And he was also a Nazi, so it's unsurprising that Hans Asperger had participated in a child euthanasia program. And that alone should be proof enough that this man was a horrible person, yet we see many arguments on the topic. Some praise this awful person for, quote-unquote, saving autistic children, when in reality, he was separating them based on capabilities that he deemed valuable, and chose which ones deserved to die and which ones deserved to live. And as you can guess, this has influenced the way we view autism in a lot of ways, including how we label autistics. So now that we know more about Dr. Hans Asperger and how he was a Nazi, we're going to talk about the diagnosis. So, as we know, Asperger's was later turned into a diagnosis, often used to split autistics based on whether or not the autistic person could quote-unquote function in society, and later it became part of the influence behind the Asperger genius trope. We're going to get back to that one later. In 2013, the American Psychiatric Association had removed the Asperger's disorder from the DSM and instead replaced it with autism spectrum disorder. There's a simple reason behind that, and that's that there is absolutely no difference between Asperger's and autism. They're the same thing. And for those getting angry, I promise you it's true. Autism is a spectrum. I have talked about it many times in many videos, and I'm sure you could find lots of other autistics talking about this exact topic online. While they did remove Asperger disorder from the DSM, it's taking a very long time for the term to die out. In fact, some people are fighting for it to be returned as a diagnosis. A group of these people are what are known as Aspie supremacists. Not all of the people advocating for the term Asperger's to be returned are technically Aspie supremacists, but it's still problematic just to advocate for this label to return to the DSM. Aspie supremacy is a way which some autistics like to separate themselves from other autistics, or even just the disability community as a whole. It's also the idea that Aspies are better and smarter than everyone else, including abled people and allistics. So it's a very problematic way of thinking, and it's a huge problem. Not only is the idea of Aspie supremacy inherently anti-Semitic, but it's also extremely ableist. Many Aspie supremacists are pro-eugenics, and some are also unsurprisingly racist. While not everyone who calls themselves an Aspie is pro-eugenics, them holding onto that label harms groups that have been harmed by the Nazis and are actively being targeted by neo-Nazis, even if that's not their intention. I think a very informative video on this is made by Ribera Bonbon on TikTok. They are a Jewish autistic actor whom I have a lot of respect for, and I highly recommend you check out their pages.
Hi, I'm Jewish and I'm autistic, and I'm going to tell you why you should stop using the term Asperger's. Hans Asperger was a literal Nazi who used the term Asperger syndrome to decide which disabled children were smart enough to live and which ones were not. The term Asperger syndrome is used to classify autistics into groups of which ones are useful and which ones are not. The term is a constant reminder to Jewish autistics of the horrors that we and our people endured during the Holocaust. But let's go into more recent history as why you should not be using the term Asperger's. Asperger syndrome is nothing but a functioning label in disguise. It's nothing more than a way to classify autistic people into two groups, ones that are useful in a capitalistic society and ones that are not. The people who continue to use it today want to feel as though they are superior in some way to other autistics, which is inherently harmful and filled with nothing but internalized ableism, so please stop this.
The autistic community has been greatly impacted by these Aspie supremacists. Many will target autistics online, educating others about the problematic origins of the label, claiming that they are the ones being bullied. But I really find that hard to believe when it's the Aspie supremacists that also tend to target not just Jewish autistics, but autistics who have intersectionality in other minority groups. Here are some red flags to look out for when trying to avoid Aspie supremacy. Claims that autism is not a disability and needs to be removed from the DSM. Constant separation from the rest of the autistic community. Quote unquote, I'm not like those autistics. Is fine with curing the other kind of autism because theirs is a good thing. Or talks about how they are so smart because they are an Aspie. Another one to look out for is the belief that Aspies are simply just early evolved superhumans. And there's so many more I could list, but these are just a few of the common beliefs some of these Aspie supremacists have. And if you yourself are active in the autistic community, you might recognize some of these arguments. Fair warning, I'm going to share a screenshot of some of what this looks like in the real world. These are actual screenshots that a friend of mine took when arguing with other people about how they need to stop saying that Dr. Hans Asperger was a great guy, because he wasn't. And these are just some of these people's ideas and how they view Asperger's as a diagnosis. So these are just some screenshots. So I'm going to read the screenshots now. Asperger's are more likely than others to think outside the box, resist peer pressure, overcome childhood indoctrination, make important discoveries and inventions. How disabled is that? And then Gear has his response in red off to the side where he says, here's an example of how Aspie supremacists can build Aspies up to an almost superhuman level. Now, in the description of their post, they continue to go on about like how can a disability be a gift, blah blah blah, all of that, saying that Asperger's is not a disability. This is obviously very problematic because being autistic is a disability and Asperger's is autism. And this is an example of how many Aspie supremacists try to separate themselves from other autistics. There's another example of that right here where it says a person with autism lives in his own world while a person with Asperger's lives in our world in a way of his own choosing. And Gear has his response in red and purple boxes saying, of your own choosing, do Aspies choose to have impaired fine motor skills, social difficulties, and have a hard time getting employed? So that one is pointing out how Asperger's is still a disability and how it's no different than autism, again. And then in the purple box, he says, that's the problem with sayings like this. It downplays the struggles that many autistics, Aspie or not, still face. Also, autistics live in the real world too. We just express it or react to it differently. Doesn't mean we don't live in it. So this is pointing out a lot of the ableism that some of these Aspie supremacists, will push and will say. They believe that they are separate from the rest of the disabled community as a whole, separate from those autistics, and they believe they are almost superhuman in some instances. So that is extremely problematic for obvious reasons. Unfortunately, this type of misinformation has spread and dug itself into the community, and it's time we start calling it out for what it is. And that's that it's racist, ableist, and inspired by the horrible actions of a Nazi. Not a gray hero or an autistic savior, a Nazi. This is a huge problem that has affected multiple groups within the autistic community, and it's got to stop. If you think you know someone who would benefit learning from this video, please send it to them. And like what Ribera Bonbon had said, if you were diagnosed with Asperger's after 2013, call out your doctor. I know I've said this multiple times, and I included a video where Ribera Bonbon had said it, but it's really important that we start holding doctors accountable for not being up to date. That's all for today. Please don't forget to check out Ribera Bonbon's and Gear Insta's pages. I'll have links in the description, and if you liked this video and felt like you learned a lot from it, please like and subscribe. I make videos about disability and my experience as a disabled person weekly.